So as the weather gets colder, I always find myself more in the mood for fairy tales, so today I am popping back into my very inconsistent YouTube posting schedule to share 5 fantasy books I think lovers of fairy tales would really enjoy. The first book I'd recommend is The House Saphir by Marissa Meyer. So this is a reimagining of the French fairy tale of Bluebeard, and for those who are unfamiliar with that fairy tale, Bluebeard is about this wealthy man who has a habit of murdering his wives, and the attempts of the present wife to avoid the fate of her predecessors. When I think of fairy tales, I feel like I usually think of like princesses and whimsical. I don't necessarily think about like the darker fairy tales like Bluebeard, but I actually have found that those are my favorite ones, and I did find this to be a really interesting reimagining of that Bluebeard fairy tale. This was a really great blend of romance, murder mystery, suspense, and magic, and I found the story to be pretty well paced overall. So to give you a better idea of what The House Saphir is about, this follows a girl named Mallory who is a fraud. She's born into a family of witches, but she doesn't really have any magical abilities. She can just see ghosts. She and her sister kind of make a living by selling these bogus spells to gullible buyers, and she also runs these house tours of the mansion in which the first Saphir murders took place in. So Mallory is a self-proclaimed expert on the Count Bastien Saphir, who is also known as Monsieur Le Bleu, aka this story's version of Bluebeard, who brutally killed 3 of his wives centuries ago. She never expected to meet the heir to the estate, this handsome man named Armand. Armand offers Mallory a large sum of money to get rid of Le Bleu's ghost from his ancestral home, and Mallory just can't turn this offer down. But when another murder occurs at the House Saphir, Mallory soon finds herself in the middle of a murder investigation. And in addition to that murder mystery, she also has to sort through her own feelings for a man who might actually be the murderer. So there are a lot of twists and turns in this book. I was trying to figure out like who was the murderer. I was trying to figure out how these puzzle pieces were fitting together, and I will say I got most of them wrong, which is a good thing. I did get a few right, but most of them were wrong. I loved how the darker elements of this book were blended in with the romance, and I also actually really loved the cover design as well, which I feel like reflects the book very well. You can see like the blood running down the blue stairs. There's also these cool end papers, and the book itself is blue, so I love how the design is tying into the theme of Bluebeard. But yeah, this one actually just came out on November 4th, so it is a new release. Another book on this list is Heartless by Marissa Meyer, and I do want to say before I get into this, as an honorable mention, Marissa Meyer also wrote the Lunar Chronicles, which is a YA sci-fi series that reimagines classic fairy tales in like this futuristic world with cyborgs and robots, and I'm not counting that in the 5 in this video because I didn't want every single book to be written by Marissa Meyer for this list, but just wanted to mention that for people who are interested. But anyways, back to Heartless. So Heartless is a reimagining of the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland, and it builds out like this very fascinating backstory for this villain. And in this book, before she was the Queen of Hearts, Catherine was just a girl who wanted to fall in love and a girl who wanted to open her own bakery. But she happens to be a favorite of the unmarried King of Hearts, and her family thinks that this bakery goal is a very bad idea when she could potentially be the next queen and that she should really be focusing on that. Cath then meets this guy named Jest, who is a mysterious and handsome court jester who she feels like a pull of attraction towards. They enter this secret and intense courtship, which is what Cath wanted because she wants to control her own destiny and fall in love on her own terms, but in this land of magic and monsters, unfortunately, fate has other plans. So this is a YA standalone novel, and one thing I really liked about it was that it doesn't just give you like the backstory of the Queen of Hearts, you also get glimpses of other characters from Alice in Wonderland like the Mad Hatter. I read this one a few years ago, but I do remember I think reading it almost in one sitting. The story went by super quick. I was really engaged from beginning to end, and I also found the way that the story wrapped up to be very satisfying. So Cinder House is a gothic sapphic fantasy novella that reimagines the tale of Cinderella as a ghost who's forced to haunt the house that she's murdered in. She strikes a magical bargain for the chance to go to a royal ball for 3 days, but of course things do not really go as planned. This book was not what I expected it to be, like in a good way. It was a lot like tonally darker than I anticipated, and the romance also did not shape up in the way that I thought it was going to shape up. I don't want to say too much more about this book for spoiler purposes, but I will say this definitely is a very fresh take on the tale, and there were a lot of original elements added into the story. Also, I really like the audiobook version of this, and it's a really quick read, and I think a really good read for the fall specifically. Kill the Beast by Sarah Swift is a book I read pretty recently, and I honestly didn't expect to like this book as much as I did. This is a cozy fantasy, and cozy fantasy as a genre is such a hit or miss for me. I think I've talked about this before, but if there are no like clear stakes in the book, I just can't get invested in the story, I can't get invested in the characters. But this book did not have that issue. It sets the stakes very clearly from the beginning, and this book is like a mix of The Witcher and Howl's Moving Castle. So this book follows a main character whose brother was killed by this very main monster known as the Beast, and the main character makes this vow to avenge his death and kill this immortal creature. So for 13 years, this main character has been hunting fairies, she's killing all the abominations that they've made, but she just can't find this beast. But one day she meets this guy named Alderic, who's kind of like this melodramatic dandy who has somehow found the beast's lair and also a claw of the beast. Anyways, the main character is forced to team up with him because she needs that claw to like forge the sword that will kill the beast. And even though she dislikes him a lot from the beginning, she thinks he's useless and annoying, their feelings soon begin to develop for each other. But both are harboring some dark secrets, as they both soon find out. So yeah, that's like the gist of the premise, and this book really did read like a dark fairy tale. It also had an emotional depth that I was not expecting when I first picked it up, but it does come with all those feel-good vibes that you would typically expect in a cozy fantasy. And last but not least, we have Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. And this whole series is just so whimsical, it's so magical, and it really feels like you've stepped into a fairy tale. So this book follows Evangeline Fox, who is a girl who's always believed in happy endings and true love until she finds out that the love of her life is set to marry another. She is desperate to stop this wedding, and in that desperation, she makes a deal with the charming but wicked Prince of Hearts. But Evangeline soon finds out that bargaining with a mortal is a dangerous game, and that the Prince of Hearts wants a lot more from her than she anticipated. And so Evangeline must go on this adventure to see if she'll find her own happily ever after, or if her story will end in tragedy. I will say I didn't love the third and final book of the series, and I know a lot of other people didn't like it as well. I just didn't feel like it wrapped up the story particularly well, but I'm still recommending the series because I did enjoy books 1 and 2. I love Evangeline and Jax, and I do feel like this has all the fairy tale vibes that I was craving at the time that I picked up these books. Also, this is the UK cover, but just look at that cover. Like, does that not scream fairy tale? So those are the 5 books that I had for you today, and actually 3 out of these 5 came out very recently. Kill the Beast came out October, Cinder House I believe also came out in October, and then the House Saphir came out November 4th. So if you are looking for some new releases, some new books to try before the year is over, I would recommend those. I'm not sure when my next YouTube video will be. I do have kind of a busy month heading into December, so if I don't see you before the end of 2025, thanks so much for being here this year. I hope you enjoy the holiday season, and I'll catch you in 2026.